Good morning. This morning we have our next installment of senior speeches. In this case, two versions of wisdom speeches, work crafted initially for the mid-year exam in English 12, when students deliver an original speech that offers valedictory words of wisdom derived from one or more texts studied anywhere during a student's time in the RL English classroom. As a side note, it's never too soon to consider, perhaps each school year, in English but across your classes, those stories, poems, plays, novels, or nonfiction that speak to you, that might serve as a source of guiding wisdom. You might keep a running list this year, mental notes at least, letting the reading you're doing in so many different courses inform your developing values and worldview. That's what it's all about. Today, one speech will reference a story from 6th year, and the second, a story studied in Class 2. Together, you'll hear about the importance of growing up into a complex world and developing empathy, and about the limits of empathy, the need for more than feeling momentarily or perhaps merely concern for others. Please welcome to the lectern two boys from Class 1, first Omar Rahman, and then Alex Giordano.
Innocence is the first lie we tell ourselves. It's comforting to believe that the world is simple, that happiness comes easily, and that pain is something distant. For these reasons, we're sometimes told to hold on to our innocence. And to some extent, I agree. When I think of my childhood joys, going to Pizza Stop every day after school, walking with my friends around my neighborhood with a supreme sense of confidence, or making homemade ice cream on Sunday afternoons. These memories evoke a feeling of lightness when no cares or anxieties press down on me. I lived in my own little world, untouched by other struggles. As these memories fade more and more into the past, I'm realizing that growing up isn't just about growing older. It's about losing the ease of seeing the world as simple. And yet, I wouldn't say that I've gotten wiser. At 18, to say that I've achieved wisdom would feel precocious. But I will say this. I now have a better grasp of what wisdom is, or at least what it isn't. I used to think that wisdom came in clear, crisp revelations that fit neatly into packets of proverbs. Actions speak louder than words. Time heals all wounds. I realize now, though, that these proverbial wisdoms fail because they oversimplify our lives, assume an ideal world where they apply universally, and treat us like children. Sometimes they can even be wrong. In fact, I wouldn't say that words can't be more powerful than actions, or that time does heal all wounds. So, in these next minutes, I want to suggest to you all that real wisdom, or rather the acquisition of real wisdom, only comes when we stop clinging to our idealized versions of the world. It's about seeing clearly in a world full of contradictions. With this clarity, we can finally escape from ourselves and see the world from behind the eyes of someone else. Eugene Collier's work of short fiction, Marigolds, challenges our innocence, those warm, nostalgic tugs of our childhood. The story doesn't celebrate innocence with its bells and whistles, its ignorance and bliss. It dismantles it to offer something far more important in its place: compassion. The world of Elizabeth, the protagonist of the story, is a hard one, much harder than any of ours. Poverty weighs down heavily on every aspect of her life, from the dust that coats her surroundings to the deep-seated despair she feels but cannot pinpoint. She describes her hometown as a barren dust heap of grassless yards and brown roads, a place where she feels stagnant and hope comes in slim quantity. Yet amidst the sterility and blanched circumstances of her life, Miss Lottie's marigolds stand proud, bright, and golden. To Elizabeth, these flowers seem absurd, almost offensive in their beauty. They don't fit in her world. And then, in a moment of blind, cathartic frustration, she tramples over them, pulling and destroying the perfect yellow blooms. Miss Lottie watches pitifully, distressed and saddened. This moment, however, is when Elizabeth, for the first time, truly sees Miss Lottie, remarking she was no longer a witch, but a broken-down old lady. Elizabeth is able to look past herself into the depths of another person, and here she sheds her innocence. Looking back at this story now, I think it speaks directly to what wisdom is. This insight has stayed with me and has shaped my two quasi-wisdoms, or more accurately, the not-quite wisdoms of an 18-year-old that I'd like to impart today. First, the end of innocence isn't a loss. It's a beginning. When Elizabeth destroys the marigolds, she steps into a world of understanding, a world where she can no longer ignore the pain of Miss Lottie, a woman damaged by a lifetime of hardship, clinging to the flowers as a fragile lifeline of hope. For Elizabeth, this beginning of womanhood means leaving behind the comfort and naivety and facing the uncomfortable truths of human existence. This heightened awareness, however, is not liberating. It's sobering. Elizabeth reflects, I had indeed lost my mind, and replaced it with a knowledge that was the beginning of compassion. This is the paradox of understanding. It brings us clarity, but also forces us to confront the pain and struggles of others that innocence shields us from. Their triumphs, their wounds, and most importantly, their humanity. This burden of understanding is something we all carry with us as we grow. But still, how often do we lash out without seeing the quiet struggles of those around us? Maybe it's a moment of frustration or a harsh word spoken to someone who's already carrying more than they can handle. Understanding other people, though, means shouldering the weight of their realities, a necessary but far from easy first step. It is the foundation for compassion, and compassion, as Elizabeth puts it, one cannot have both compassion and innocence. This reflection leads me to my second point. Once innocence is gone, we are left with the weight of responsibility. For Elizabeth, this means recognizing her role in Miss Lottie's suffering and understanding that her actions have immediate and observable consequences. At the same time, her recognition does not entirely acquit her. Despite her wild contrition, Miss Lottie never planted marigolds again. Elizabeth's guilt, however, doesn't paralyze her. Instead, she takes on Miss Lottie's role, planting marigolds herself as an act of remembrance. When I was younger, I shared a similar experience with Elizabeth. Like Miss Lottie, my neighbor, Mr. Patrick, meticulously tended his garden and plants. My friends and I used to slip through a gap in the fence bordering our two houses and run throughout the garden. There was a thrill in the secrecy of our trespassing, and we showed little regard for his plants. One day, Mr. Patrick spotted our brigade. He started walking toward us, and we ran. My friends reached the fence, but right before I could, I got caught in his hedges, and their thin branches pierced my clothes. I awaited my impending doom. To my surprise, instead of yelling, Mr. Patrick gently helped me out of the hedge and explained how much time and care he devoted to growing his rare plants. He told me how even small damage could take years to repair and grow back. I avoided him after that, too ashamed to apologize. Years later, I found out that he had died from cancer. After this experience, I gradually began to lose my innocent view of others' lives. For the first time, I considered how my actions might affect someone else. Realizing the damage I had caused forced me to look past myself, and my regret grew into responsibility to show compassion and respect for Mr. Patrick's memory. It was a suffocating burden, but a necessary one. So, as I close, I want to leave you with this. Real wisdom only comes when we look past ourselves and embrace the complexities of others' lives. I realize that innocence isn't something we lose all at once. It unravels in small moments like these. And as it unravels, we're left with something raw but real. The quiet realization that everyone carries their own fragile marigolds. Next time you see something that feels out of place, like Miss Lottie's marigolds, resist the impulse to dismiss it or destroy it. Look closer not just at the marigolds, but at the hands that planted them. Thank you.
What changes when you become 18 years old? It's the beginning of adulthood, sure, and you get a host of new benefits, driving whenever you want, having newfound independence, but that's not fully how it feels. When I turned 18 years old, I was standing in the kitchen of my girlfriend's house. On the countertop, there was a small cupcake with one lone burning candle. As the clock on my phone displayed midnight, I guess I expected some change as the curly wisps of smoke drifted towards the ceiling. I guess I thought my eyes would be opened. I guess I thought I'd be ready for adulthood, for what that meant. All I remember, though, is realizing one thing. Nothing had changed. I was a kid who knew nothing, who was nowhere near ready to take on the world. And as much as I wish I could stand here and tell you all that fact has changed, it hasn't. I'm the same boy I was 6 months ago. I want you to imagine that my speech ended right there. Perhaps this would affect you in no way, shape, or form, but I'm willing to bet that at least one of you would pause and think, even momentarily, is he okay? The real question, though, is whether any of you, as I walk out of those doors, would ask me that very same question. From a very young age, we are taught that the emotional response I described above, empathy, is an inherently good thing. And for the most part, I agree with that statement. The ability to understand someone's perspective is quite valuable, and the common saying, learn to walk a mile in someone's shoes, is helpful to some degree as well. But these lessons of empathy, I'm afraid, have failed us all majorly. We think empathy, in and of itself, is enough. In this speech, I hope to first explain the inherent benefits of empathy before discussing, more importantly, the common pitfall I just described. To do so, let me direct your attention to Herman Melville's short story, Bartleby the Scrivener. For those who haven't read the work, the story begins with a narrator, a private lawyer overseeing an office where legal documents are copied manually, describing his hiring of a man named Bartleby. While an utter machine of a worker, Bartleby spends almost all of his time in the office, and as weeks pass, the narrator comes to see oddities in Bartleby's behavior. Not only does he refuse to help the narrator with any tasks, as he simply prefers not to, but he has no family, no friends, and unknown to the narrator, even sleeps in the office at night. One Sunday morning, as the narrator finds himself near the office after going to church, he decides to stop by and meets Bartleby behind the door. He's disheveled, as anyone would be having just woken up, and it's at this moment where the narrator is faced with a choice, either to criticize or accept. While I will tell you what he does, you already know the answer. We go to a school that prides itself on the moral character of its students, and while I doubt you will go home one night and find a classmate in your room, the inherent complication that the narrator finds himself in, a response to so-called failures in others, is not unlike those we experience on a day-to-day basis. Such mishaps, arriving late to school, or doing poorly on a test, warrant little more than gentle mockery, or maybe a work squad from time to time. And this intrinsic reaction relies almost entirely on the positive presence of empathy. Not only does it represent the backbone of the phrase, the benefit of the doubt, but it more fundamentally allows the mind to cast aside any initial impulsive criticisms. In the context of these daily events, we inherently consider outside reasons, asking the why to the situation in front of us. The late arrival to school or the bad test now don't solely represent a late arrival or a bad test, but a string of events that could have happened prior. A poor night of sleep, a late practice, or a family obligation, for example. Empathy provides perspective and hinders our admonitions in the goodwill of others. So, as the narrator gazes into Bartleby's tired eyes, all initial criticisms vanish, and he allows Bartleby to clean up and leave the office without a word. Now, these are the benefits of empathy that we all to some degree possess. What I truly want to talk about is the idea of complacency, the idea that simply having empathy for someone is enough. As Bartleby continues to work at the office, the narrator notices more and more abnormalities in Bartleby's behavior. One such example being him frequently standing motionless at the window while staring at the dead brick wall outside. Regardless, the narrator's empathy remains until eventually he concludes that, quote, "It was Bartleby's soul that suffered, and his soul he could not reach," end quote. While the truth in the statement itself I can neither confirm nor deny, the problem with the narrator's logic lies in those last three words, could not reach. At this point, he's provided no concrete aid, and given that fact, this resolution becomes nothing more than a coping mechanism, a kind of get-out-of-jail-free card, if you will. It's as if he's done his fair share of empathizing, and by extension, his duties to provide any sort of moral support for Bartleby are fulfilled. It's not that the narrator can't reach Bartleby's soul, it's that he won't. As the story progresses, the narrator becomes increasingly haunted by Bartleby's behavior, deciding to relocate the company's office entirely and leave Bartleby unmoving in the old one as he attempts to turn him into an ancient memory. However, after receiving a few calls from the new owner of the old office, begging him to come back and try to get Bartleby to leave, he reluctantly obliges. While it would seem here that his previous complacency could begin to dwindle, the result of his endeavors reveals otherwise. After failing to get Bartleby to move, he laments, quote, "I distinctly perceived that I had now done all that I possibly could," end quote. To some degree, the narrator does deserve a little recognition for attempting to rectify the situation. But as before, the final sentiment is one of neglect. He gives up once more, his duties are once again fulfilled, and he leaves Bartleby to be taken into prison for vagrancy, where he ultimately dies from starvation. While this experience seems unique and rather dramatic, I'm willing to guarantee that all of us have done a similar thing before, all through the simple phrase, "There's nothing I can do." However small, each time we use this phrase in the context of another person, either verbally or internally, we violate the humanity of that individual. By not attempting to do anything, they become not worthy of our time. It's not an uncommon occurrence, and while I wish this somehow didn't apply to me, that is hardly the case. Just a few weeks ago, I noticed my brother having a hard time with school, soccer, and everything else that comes with a boy being his age. Of course, being his brother, I felt for him, but I didn't do anything. I told myself he'd just have to figure it out on his own. My decision was selfish, no doubt, but nonetheless emphasizes the detrimental prevalence of this empathetic complacency. I don't fully know if what I just told you all was wisdom, or simply just a set of observations strung together in a particular order. But I suppose wisdom is simply lived experiences, and observations serve as a step in the right direction. A step that hopefully, when a boy comes up to a podium and delivers a paragraph like my first one today, prompts not only empathy, but an urge to break free from this complacency by talking to that boy as he walks out the door. Thank you.
Thank you both. A lot to ponder in that this morning. themes of innocence and marigolds and planting and empathy and complacency and what we can do about that. And so I think Class 1, you are all honored to have those two young men in your midst. I think we are all honored to have them and those thoughts. And I think those are wisdom speeches, but I think both of them had a similar theme of a call to action. And so I hope you all will think and ponder and then perhaps do something on that. So I hope you all have a wonderful Tuesday. Thank you both, Class 1.